My name is Charlie Richards. I drew my first house when I was 6, in the back of a spiral notebook my mother bought for 39 cents at a drugstore in Lowell. Not a house exactly. A shape that had a door and a chimney, and always at least one window with a curtain drawn halfway, like someone inside was deciding whether to look out. I don't know why I drew them. I just knew that when I was drawing one, nothing else was happening to me. That was the whole appeal, if I'm honest. Nothing else was happening. For a moment, I had a bit of calm. My childhood ran on a rotation of apartments, a rotation of towns, and a rotation of reasons why we were leaving this time. My father, Paul, had a genius for finding jobs and an equal genius for losing them. He'd come home some Fridays lit up like he'd solved something, and by Monday the job would be gone, and so, sometimes, would he. Not permanently, just enough. A few nights in his car, a week at a cousin's, once, 6 weeks. And my mother never explained where, and I never asked, because even at 8 I understood some questions were requests to make things worse. My mother, Ava, was so smart, though in the aching way of people who never got the chance to prove it on paper. She read everything. She corrected our grammar mid-sentence out of some reflex she couldn't turn off, even when we were 3 days from being evicted and grammar was not the emergency. She never went past high school. I think she carried that like a stone in her shoe her whole life, and the only thing she knew to do with it was make sure her daughters didn't carry that same stone. There was a parent-teacher night in 4th grade where the teachers set up sample worksheets so parents could see what the kids were working on. My mother stood at the table longer than the other parents, holding a fraction worksheet like it might rearrange itself into something she recognized. A teacher, meaning well, asked if she wanted to walk through it together. My mother said no, she was fine, she just liked knowing what I was up to, and then found me across the room and stayed near me for the rest of the night, close enough to touch my shoulder, not talking much. On the drive home, she was quiet in the specific way that meant something had landed wrong. Then, at a red light, not looking at me, she said, "I could have been good at that stuff, you know, given the chance." I said I knew. She said, "I'm not saying it for sympathy," which was the thing people say right before you understand exactly how much sympathy they need. The light turned green before either of us said anything else, and she never brought it up again. But I noticed she signed up to help with school fundraisers after that, every year, like she was trying to stay close to a building she'd never gotten to belong to any other way. I think about now what she could have been with that command of language, a teacher, an editor, a lawyer who could take apart an argument the way she took apart a run-on sentence without even trying. She had the kind of mind that noticed a dangling modifier in an eviction notice and a false note in a stranger's voice in the same breath, and instead it spent itself proofreading school permission slips and rehearsing. In her head, arguments with landlords she'd never win on paper. That unlived version of her shaped every decision she made for Renee and me, whether we could see it or not. It's why she sat with us for hours over college applications. She didn't understand the terminology of asking us to explain acronyms back to her until she did. It's why, the year I was choosing between a full scholarship 2 states away and a cheaper school closer to home, she told me to take the scholarship even though it meant I'd be gone. "Don't you dare pick the small thing because it's safe," she said. "I know what small things cost." She was building, I understand now, the exact thing she'd never gotten to have, except she was building it out of us instead of herself, one permission slip and one hard sentence at a time. Like I said, my mother wanted to make sure her daughters didn't carry that burden of lost opportunities. But for us, her daughters, that's the part that gets complicated. My sister Renee is 2 years older than me, and for most of my childhood she was the noise the house made. She pulled my hair hard enough to bring tears before school photos. She told our mother I'd broken things I hadn't touched, cried on command, had a face that could rearrange itself into wounded innocence faster than I could say that's not what happened. And it worked, every time. Because Renee had figured out early what I didn't figure out until much later, that being loved and being believed aren't the same operation, and if you can only get one, get believed. She was the favorite. Not cruelly. My mother wasn't a cruel woman. She was just tired, and tired people default to whoever's easiest. And Renee, for all her damage, was easy to comfort and hard to doubt. I was neither. I was quiet. I did my homework in cars. I got good at being fine. School was the only room in my life with consistent walls. Same building, same bell schedule, same rules, applied the same way to everyone, which felt, after a childhood of rules that changed depending on my father's mood or my sister's tears, like a form of luxury. I thrived there in a way that had nothing to do with being smart and everything to do with being steady. I could count on Tuesday's math class the way other kids could count on dinner. I memorized the small architecture of it without meaning to, which floor tile in the hallway was cracked, which radiator by the coat hooks clanked twice before it warmed up, which teacher left the classroom door propped early so kids who got dropped off before the building technically opened had somewhere to sit. I got to school early whenever I could, not out of enthusiasm exactly, but because early meant empty, and empty meant nothing could go wrong yet. I liked the particular quiet of a classroom before the other kids arrived, the chairs still upside down on the desks from the night before, the smell of pencil shavings and the industrial cleaner they mopped the floors with. It was a smell I came to associate privately with safety, the way other kids might associate a certain soap with their mother. I was the kid who never asked for extensions because the due date, once given, was the one true thing I could hold on to that week. Homework felt less like a task and more like a contract someone had actually agreed to keep. If the assignment said Friday, it meant Friday, not Friday unless your father comes home and everyone's mood changes, or Friday unless Renee needs you to cover for something. I got a quiet, specific satisfaction out of turning things in exactly on time, of watching a teacher check my name off a list without incident, because incident-free was not something I could count on anywhere else in my life. School didn't just teach me things. It taught me that a rule, once stated, could actually hold. I didn't have that anywhere else yet. I kept drawing houses, big ones, small ones, fairy houses built into tree roots, cave houses with stone mouths for doors. I didn't know yet that this was a language. I just knew it was the only sentence I could finish. I remember one, specifically, from the year we lived in the apartment above the laundromat, a house I drew probably a dozen times with small variations, always with the same detail. A door that locked from the inside with 3 separate latches, drawn carefully, out of proportion, bigger than they needed to be, so the teacher checking my folder would definitely notice them. I never talked about why. I just kept drawing the latches bigger. Underneath the house I wrote, "Nobody comes in unless I say," in the uneven print of an 8-year-old, and then got embarrassed and scribbled it out so hard the pencil tore the paper and drew over the tear with grass. I never showed those pages to my mother. Not because I thought she'd be upset. I think now she would have understood immediately, maybe better than anyone, but because some instinct told me the drawings only worked as a private thing. If someone else looked at them too closely, they might stop being a place I could go and start being a thing I had to explain. So I kept a folder of them in the bottom of my backpack, under a false floor of gym clothes, the way other kids hid notes or candy. Rooms with good light, doors that locked when I said so, nobody drawn inside them but me. I didn't go to college the way people mean when they say I went to college. I took one class at a community college the semester I could afford one class. I worked, saved, took a semester off, worked more, took another class, then 2. I transferred into a university architectural engineering program online, still one class at a time some semesters, because tuition doesn't care that you're doing your best. I finished my bachelor's degree at 26, 4 years behind a traditional timeline, and I would like to tell you I didn't care about that number, but I did, a little in the private way you care about things you've decided not to say out loud. People asked why architectural engineering and not architecture, why the structural side, the load calculations, and the material science, instead of just the design. I gave different answers depending on who was asking. The true answer is this. I didn't want to draw a pretty house that would fall down in a storm. I wanted to know, in my hands and in my math, exactly why a house stays standing. I wanted to understand the bones, not just the face. Because somewhere in me, underneath the part that was drawing curtains on windows since I was 6, was a much simpler wish. I want to know how to build something that doesn't fall apart. I built a career eventually specializing in bespoke homes, the kind of work where a client wants a house that's a physical translation of a specific private piece they're chasing. It paid well enough that I could also volunteer on the side, designing community shelters and low-income housing developments. People sometimes framed that as generous. It wasn't generous, it was personal. I knew what it was to need walls that held. My mother died when I was 29, my father 2 years after her, in a way that surprised no one and still managed to hurt. After that, it was just me and Renee, and an unspoken agreement, inherited rather than chosen, that we were each other's family now, because that's what sisters are supposed to be when the parents are gone. I believed that agreement for a long time, longer than I should have. Here is the kind of thing that happened regularly in the years between 20-something and 34. I got a call back for a junior position at a firm I'd wanted since school, a real one, competitive, the kind of place that could make a career. Renee asked, very casually over coffee, what the interview would be like, what I'd wear, who I'd be meeting. I told her. 2 days before the interview, the firm's HR contact called to confirm the reschedule because someone claiming to be my assistant had called to push the date. My assistant, at 24, with no assistant, and the new date they'd agreed to was a date I'd already told Renee I had a family obligation on, a birthday dinner she'd guilted me into attending. I didn't get the job. Not because of the reschedule alone, plenty of things go wrong in a hiring process, but the timing was too clean to be coincidence. And when I asked Renee about it, her face did the thing it always did. I want to describe that face because I got so used to reading it that I could have drawn it blind. It was a soft blink, followed by a small, downturned smile. Not a smirk, nothing so obvious. It looked like hurt. It looked like, how could you think that of me? It was, I understand now, a performance so old it had stopped feeling like performance even to her. I would never do that to you, she said. Soft blink, downturned smile. You know how much I want good things for you. I believed her. That time. This was the pattern, and I want to lay it out because naming a pattern is the only way to eventually stop living inside it. Something small would happen. A lie, a misunderstanding, a canceled plan that cost me something real. I would confront her calmly because I was always calm. That was my whole personality by then, a woman assembled entirely out of not being my family. She would give me a promise, soft focus and warm, that felt like enough at the time and turned out, every single time, to be hollow. And then, a little later, something slightly worse would happen. Money borrowed and not returned. A story told to a mutual friend that painted me as cold, ungrateful, hard to love. Each cycle came faster than the last, the way weather moves faster right before it turns into something you have to take shelter from. I told myself, she's my sister, our parents are gone, this is what family costs. I did not yet understand that a family you have to keep paying for isn't a family, it's a subscription. Somewhere in there, early 20s through my early 30s, I dated a long, loose string of men who all had one thing in common. They made my life loud. I didn't pick them for that reason consciously. I picked them the way you pick anything you've been trained to recognize as normal. If a relationship had a lot of back and forth, canceled dates, jealous accusations, dramatic reconciliations in parking lots, some part of me registered that as proof. Proof that he cared enough to fight for it. Proof that this mattered. If a man was calm, I got suspicious. Calm felt like the front porch of indifference. I remember one boyfriend, early on, who was steady and kind and never raised his voice, and I broke up with him because I couldn't shake the feeling that he simply didn't feel enough to bother arguing. I look back at that decision now the way you'd look at a photo of yourself in a coat 2 sizes too small, wondering how you didn't notice at the time that nothing fit. I didn't know yet that I had learned, in a house with disappearing fathers and hair-pulling sisters and a mother too tired to sort out who was lying, that chaos was the only dialect love came in. If there was no noise, I assumed there was no feeling. Then there was Steve. Steve and I were together for 3 years, starting when I was 31. It was, at the time, the longest relationship of my life, and I mistook longevity for depth, which is a mistake I don't think I'm alone in making. Steve moved in with me somewhere around month 4. Moved out somewhere around month 9 after an argument that I no longer remember the content of, only the shape. His voice rising, mine staying level, him needing space, me giving it because giving space felt, at the time, like maturity. Moved back in around month 11. This cycle repeated itself with the seasonal reliability of a tide chart. I later heard someone describe a man like that as hobosexual, and laughed out loud in a coffee shop, alone, because I hadn't known there was a word for it, and having a word for it made 3 years of my life suddenly understandable in a way that stung. I paid for most things, the rent almost entirely, all the utilities. Steve paid for the cable and most months the internet. I'm saying this plainly, without editorializing, because the plainness is the indictment. A grown man paid for the thing that entertained him and let a woman he claimed to love cover the roof over both their heads. I told myself this was generosity. I told myself I didn't need reciprocity to prove love, because, and here's the sentence I actually said out loud to a friend once, and I still remember how confident I sounded saying it, it's not about the money, it's about whether he's there. He was there. Physically. In the sense that his shoes were in my hallway. Then I found out he was sleeping with my sister. I don't want to dramatize how I found out because the truth is almost insultingly undramatic. A text, meant for her, sent to me by mistake, or maybe not entirely by mistake. Some deep, tired part of me still wonders if some corner of him wanted to be caught, wanted someone else to end it so he wouldn't have to. The text used a nickname for my sister, Renee, I recognized, a private one, the kind you only earn. I sat with my phone for a long time before I did anything, long enough for the light outside to change. Renee's face, when I called her, did something I hadn't catalogued before, not the soft blink, not the downturned smile. Something under it, for just a half second before she rearranged herself, a flash of something closer to fear, or maybe just the recognition that this time the performance wasn't going to land. Then the mask came back up, faster than I expected, faster than it had any right to. "It just happened," she said. "You know how he is. I didn't mean for it to—" I asked her how long. She said 8 months. I did the math without wanting to. 8 months was most of the last moved back in cycle. 8 months was me paying rent for a man who was, on the nights he wasn't at my apartment, at my sister's, I packed his things into 3 trash bags because I didn't own enough suitcases for the amount of stuff a man accumulates when he isn't paying for the space he's accumulating it in. I set the bags outside my own front door, which felt like the wrong door for the gesture, but it was the only door I had. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. People who know that story now sometimes seem disappointed by that detail, like the story owes them a shattered plate. I just felt, very clearly, something come loose that had been bolted down for a very long time, the belief that if I was calm enough, patient enough, generous enough, the chaos around me would eventually resolve into something that looked like being loved. It didn't resolve. It was never going to resolve. It was just chaos, doing what chaos does, which is nothing forever unless someone stops feeding it. I decided to swear off men for a year, not as a bit, not as something to post about. I made a private, unglamorous decision to not date, not flirt, not leave a door open just in case for 12 months, so I could find out who I was without someone else's noise providing the soundtrack. Here is what I found, and I say this without romanticizing it, because it was more clinical than poetic. The chronic headaches I'd had for almost a decade, the ones 3 doctors had shrugged at and called stress-related, stopped. Not gradually. Within about 6 weeks of Steve being gone and me deciding not to replace him with a new version of the same problem, they simply stopped, and I realized I'd been in a kind of quiet, low-grade pain for so long I'd mistaken it for baseline. I also lost 11 pounds I'd been fighting for years to lose. I hadn't changed how I ate. I think now that I'd simply stopped digesting stress instead of food, and my body, given the chance, sorted itself out without my supervision. I used to think a home needed noise to prove it was full. I started to understand that year that a body is a kind of home too, and mine had been trying to tell me for a decade that it wasn't structurally sound, and I'd kept redecorating the surface instead of checking the foundation. It took me a long time to actually cut Renee loose, because the clean version of this story, the one where I find out about Steve and simply, nobly, walk away from my sister forever, isn't the true one, and I think the true one is more useful. I tried, that year and the year after, several off-ramps that weren't the real decision, just tests of it. I tried limited contact, birthdays and holidays only, nothing in between. She showed up anyway, at my office once, just to see how I was doing, and cried in the lobby until I came down, and I stayed calm, and she gave me a soft, warm promise about how she wanted to be better, and I believed her a little because some old muscle in me still wanted to. I tried a mediated conversation, a coffee where we both agreed to say what we needed and hear each other out. She cried at the right moments. She said the word sorry 4 times, correctly spaced, and I remember noting, almost against my will, that it felt rehearsed the way a good speech feels rehearsed, technically moving, structurally hollow. I tried, once, genuinely trying to rebuild something, inviting her to a small dinner, telling myself, our parents are gone. She's the only blood I have left. Maybe this time is the time it holds. 3 weeks later, she asked to borrow $4,000 for an emergency. She wouldn't specify. And when I said no, the soft blink came back, the downturned smile, the I thought you of all people would understand what it's like to not have anyone. I understood, finally, sitting across from her that day, that Renee wasn't a person I had a bad relationship with. Renee was the noise the house made, and I had spent 30-some years trying to soundproof a room instead of asking why the walls let so much through. The real decision, when it came, wasn't dramatic. There was no last straw, no final blow-up. I simply stopped answering on the 3rd ring. I let messages sit for days, then weeks. I didn't announce it. I didn't need her to understand it or agree to it. I had spent my whole life believing I had to keep this relationship because both our parents were dead and she was the only family I had left. I understood, slowly and then all at once, that found family is not a consolation prize for people who can't keep their blood family. It's often just the healthier option, dressed up as a lesser one so the people who benefit from your loyalty can keep collecting on it. Here's a detail I hadn't told anyone, not even close friends, for years. All through the chaos, the boyfriends, Steve, Renee's slow bleed on my finances and my nerves, I had been designing a house, not for a client, for me. It started on napkins, literally, coffee shop napkins, with a floor plan sketched in ballpoint because I didn't have paper on me and didn't want to lose the thought. Then notebooks. The same kind of cheap spiral notebook my mother used to buy, 39 cents worth of possibility, except now I was drawing load-bearing walls instead of curtained windows on fairy houses. Then, once I could afford the license, actual architecture software, I remember the first night I opened a real 3D rendering of it, rotated the model on my screen, and felt something in my chest go quiet in a way it almost never did. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen with a window over the sink facing east, so the morning light would hit it first. A single, oversized room that was technically a great room on the drawings, but that I privately called in my head the quiet room. No specific plan for what would happen in it. Just a place with good light and nothing in it demanding anything of me. I'd been saving for years, quietly, the way you save when you don't yet believe the thing you're saving for is allowed to be real. When Steve left and Renee finally lost her hold, I had, it turned out, enough. I bought a plot of land outside Boston, fields on 2 sides, woods on the 3rd, the kind of quiet that isn't empty so much as unclaimed, waiting to be filled with whatever I decided to put there instead of whatever had always been put there for me. I started with the foundation, just the foundation, and 2 rooms I could actually live in right away. The kitchen and the quiet room, functional, heated, real, with the rest of the house drawn up, priced out and scheduled to happen in pieces, over years, as I could afford it. 10 years, maybe, before the whole structure matched the drawings. I decided I was fine with that. "This is mine," I told myself, standing on poured concrete before the walls even existed, feeling the cold through my shoes. Nobody borrowed the down payment. Nobody's name is on this but mine. Nobody can move out of it and back into it on a schedule that serves them. People ask if it's lonely, living in a 2-room house on a foundation for a place that isn't finished yet, on the edge of woods, mostly by myself. I tell them the truth, which surprises some of them. It's the first time in my life quiet hasn't felt like the room before an argument. For 30-some years, calm was the eye of a storm, a pause I distrusted because I knew from long experience that it never lasted. Here, calm is just what the house sounds like. No one is about to slam a door. No one is testing whether I'll notice they're gone before they come back needing something. I still see Renee's face sometimes when I let myself think about her, which I try not to do often. Not the soft blink and smile anymore. What I remember, when I let it surface, is that half-second of real fear the day I found out about Steve before she rearranged it back into performance. I think about how much of her life she must have spent doing that rearranging, and some old, stubborn part of me is sorry for her, even now. I'm careful with that feeling. Sorry for someone isn't the same as owing them your foundation. I don't talk to my sister anymore. This isn't a clean, triumphant sentence for me to say. There's no, and I've never been happier waiting at the end of it. No bow. What I don't miss is easy to name. The phone ringing with dread already attached to it. The soft blink that meant a lie was arriving. The particular exhaustion of being someone's only stable thing while getting none of that stability back. What I do miss, quietly on certain nights, is a version of her that I made up mostly out of hope. The sister I kept waiting for underneath the one I actually had. I'm not sure that person ever existed outside of my own drawings, but I miss her anyway, the way you can miss a house you designed and never got to build. Some mornings I stand in the quiet room before the lights fully up, some Vietnamese coffee with condensed milk in hand, and I look out at the fields on one side and the woods on the other, at land with my name on the deed and nobody else's, and I think about a 6-year-old with a 39-cent notebook, drawing a window with the curtain pulled halfway, like she was still deciding whether to look out. I know now what I was actually drawing all those years. Not a house. A test. Could a place hold still long enough for someone to actually live in it? Turns out it can. It just had to be built by me, on my own schedule, on ground I chose myself, with the noise I used to mistake for love left out of the blueprints entirely. It's good being here by myself. I'm not going to pretend that's the whole tidy truth of it, but it's most of the truth. And for the first time, that's enough of a foundation to build on. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.